Welcome to the LinkedIn Trust Series at Advertising Week New York. I'm BJ Smith, and I'm joined by Eric Johnson, SVP of Marketing at Condé Nast. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today.
Absolutely, it's good to see you. So, what effect has fake news had on the brands at Condé Nast?
Fake news? Oh, well, it's interesting. Fake news has had actually a very positive effect on the brands overall at Condé Nast. You look at the bastions of solid journalisms like the New Yorker, the Vanity Fair, brands in the portfolio, and you've seen amazing attraction to real authentic news that they know comes from a trusted source. We've also seen the advent of other brands like Teen Vogue that maybe were a little bit outside the realm of what was happening from a political climate or from a news cycle, really kind of readdress the way that consumers and their audiences are engaged with that news cycle itself, and put themselves in front of an audience that's hungry for that type of information from a trusted source.
Yeah, and so people are actually paying more attention now to their sources. They aren't just taking what they see and saying, okay, I don't care what this website is, I'm going to believe what it says. They're looking for trusted sources.
I think we hope that that's happening for consumers overall, and I think I think the best way you can consider it is kind of with a sense of empathy, in that how am I looking at news differently than I was maybe 6 months ago, 8 months ago, a year ago. And I have to admit, I would look at certain outlets, the Facebooks, or even certain more established news outlets, and just take them at face value and really think that that is the truth. If it's showing up in my feed, if it's showing up on air, if it's showing up in some cases in print, that was the truth. And I think in this kind of like post-truth era, there is a scrutiny that's happening for everybody. And I look at now how I ultimately want to validate information across the board, and look at a variety of different of sources that compare notes in a way.
So we're actually living in a very evolving media landscape, and how is that affecting trust?
Evolving media landscape, yes, it's wildly changed in the matter of a couple months and a couple years. And I think it's been beneficial in some regards, because the brands that have maintained trust with the reader and the consumer and the audience, we're seeing a renewed interest, and we're seeing that level of trust actually grow. I think where it's been challenging is that there's a lot of places to go for information. So the idea of getting in front of the right people to influence that level of trust and to maintain that level of trust has been a real challenge, because in a fragmented world, you're going to have to make choices throughout your day when you're fed so much content throughout the day, and making sure that you're ultimately reaching that right information that you're choosing to engage with.
Right. So with media, we're learning, it's important to vet sources. It's important not to just take what you hear and run with it, obviously.
Right.
Obviously, your more mature brands don't have that problem to begin with.
No.
But how do we take some of what we're learning from the media and apply that to brands to build trust? Because it's one thing to say, I'm not going to post this fake story or the story that I'm not 100% sure about, but how do you apply that to a brand?
That's an interesting challenge, and I think brands out there have to be very careful about where they're putting their content, their message, because ultimately, if they are standing for something out there, which is, I think, one of the foundations for building trust with the consumer, standing for something, believing in it, and having a consistency in the message is really key to that level of brand trust that you want to have with your client or your customer. So if you have a message that, let's say, is about sustainability and health and wellness, and then you show up in a place that doesn't necessarily represent that, or were placed there, your message was placed there due to certain keywords or topics, but it's actually the antithesis of that, you're immediately damaging that level of trust that you've established and spent so much time and so much of your energy and media dollars against, is going to definitely be subject to, suffer a little bit.
It's guilt by association.
Guilt by association, without a doubt, yes. Birds of a feather. So yeah, I think now more than ever, it's about, like I said, standing for something that's really authentic to what the brand means, and then being consistent in the message that they're putting in the marketplace and in the environments that they're putting it in. I think we've seen a lot of brands jump on the bandwagon of a certain really relevant moment within culture, whether that's the environment or politics or even what we're seeing with what's happening with the right to freedom of speech during the national anthem.
Right.
It's a very fine line of being true to one's brand DNA, but then also allowing for some level of involvement in these very topical times, but still being considerate of the level of trust that the consumers come to expect from your brand.
How do you feel about transparency when it comes to media?
I think it's of the utmost. I think it doesn't just apply to media, it applies to a lot of different companies. I think first and foremost, when people want to know or they want to delve further into the information that they're being fed in a magazine, online, or in their social feed, they want to know exactly who did the reporting. They want to understand where that information came from and is it trustworthy. And I think the same goes for the ingredients on the side of a box of Cheetos,
Yeah.
or the parts that went into the car that you just purchased. You want to know that all those parts that ultimately created the product that you invested your time in are in alignment with that level of trust and that level of responsibility.
Eric, thank you so much for joining us on the LinkedIn Trust Series. It's good to meet
absolutely.
you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. We'll be back with more from Advertising Week New York.